Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for July 18th, 2023. We're coming to a moment where the issue of war and peace is the primary concern, or should be the primary concern, of everyone on the planet. With the failure and the acknowledged failure of the Vilnius summit, where NATO was unable to come out with a unified policy. At least on the surface, they expressed unity, but there were enormous tensions underneath. And the question that was on many people's minds is how long can they sustain a war against Russia? And all the expectations that were involved in this, that Russia would collapse, that Russia would run out of ammunition, that the opposition in Russia would sweep away Putin. All of these expectations have fallen short. The other expectations, that the constant flow of arms and money and support for the Ukrainian government would allow a victory to occur. Well, this is not only not happening, but the West is running out of arms and running out of patience. And we're seeing a shift underway in the thinking in some Western governments, but especially around the world, a rejection of the warhawk strategy of destroying Russia and China for the sake of maintaining a unipolar order. So what we are seeing, though, is a step-by-step escalation. Remember, the Royal United Services Institute, Chatham House, Atlantic Council, all British-directed intelligence agencies, although the Atlantic Council's in Washington, it is a British-directed think tank. They've consistently repeated the theme that the solution to the war, the end of the war, will come based on attacks on Crimea, the return of Crimea to Ukraine by military victory. That will end the war. And so we've seen with the counteroffensive going nowhere, in the last days, an escalation against Crimea. And this includes attacks on the Kerch Bridge yesterday, and drone strikes this morning against Crimea. All the drones were intercepted by Russian anti-aircraft, but nevertheless, the pattern is becoming unmistakably clear. The discussion of more long-range missiles to Ukraine, which can reach Crimea, F-16 fighter jets, possibly other kinds of capabilities, all of which are being discussed as these escalations are occurring, point to the decision that is being made to escalate, to try to bring an end to the war by defeating Russia in Crimea. Now, part of this is driven by desperation. As I mentioned, the running out of armaments to send, the failure of the counteroffensive, but also growing opposition to the warhawks. Now, part of this is the work of the Schiller Institute International Peace Coalition, which is growing each week. More and more groups are being represented in the Zoom calls, strategies being worked out to incorporate more and more organizations, building toward an August 6th demonstration. August 6th being the anniversary of the nuclear strike against Hiroshima at the end of World War II. But what the Schiller Institute International Peace Coalition is about is building what Helga Zepp-LaRouche calls a higher peace movement. That is a break with the existing strategic geopolitical order of pitting nations against each other for the purposes of protecting the supremacy of the unipolar order, or the so-called rules-based order. And what we're seeing instead is the emergence of opposition to that from the global South, and now, for the first time, in the U.S. Congress. And the point that we're making is that it can't just be anti-war. It must be oriented toward addressing the problems that led to this, namely the neo-colonial system that is not only just continuing to loot the former colonial countries in the South, but is now looting the populations in Europe and the United States. So the fight for a new strategic and development architecture must be the issue that comes to the fore. Now, what we're seeing explicitly in motion toward that direction are groups associated with the Global South, the BRICS, which will be having their international conference about a month from now in South Africa, the emergence of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the African Monetary Fund or the African Union, Mercosur in South America. There's all kinds of discussions about how to move from a dollar-based system under the control of international institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, World Economic Forum, and so on, into a multipolar world, or better yet, a world in which the sovereign interests of every nation are taken into account by all nations when it comes to security and development policy. But what we're seeing now is the first signs of a shift in the U.S. Congress. This is related to a vote on July 13th on an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act that was lumped under one amendment, which was sponsored by Marjorie Taylor Greene. The idea was if Marjorie Taylor Greene is the sponsor, given that she's known as a hardcore Trump Republican, that no Democrats would support it. Well, the Greene amendment was for blocking the transfer of cluster munitions to Ukraine. And it ended up with a surprising vote. 98 Republicans and 49 Democrats voted in favor of it. So it failed to pass, but it showed something new, that the leaders of the Progressive Caucus from the Democratic Party worked together with the Freedom Caucus in the Republican Party as an anti-war mobilization. And this started to come into effect with a July 8th letter drafted by Representative Pramila Jayapal, which was a letter to Biden against cluster munitions, saying that providing these to Ukraine, quote, severely undermines our moral leadership. Now, then you had the alliance in the Congress of Republicans Matt Gaetz and Anna Paulina Luna, with Ilhan Omar and Sarah Jacobs of the Democratic Progressive Caucus, that led to this vote on the Marjorie Taylor Greene amendment of almost 150 congressmen voting against Biden's plan to send cluster munitions to Ukraine. Now, this can build and should build because the obvious point is that the situation in the United States is deteriorating, the economic conditions. The cities are disasters. The infrastructure is disastrous. The use of green technologies, or replacement of more efficient technologies with green technologies, will have the effect in the United States that it's already having in Europe, of energy shortages, of breakdown of industry, the collapse of infrastructure, and so on. And all of this will lead to a search for an alternative. But the only alternatives are those of the higher peace movement, which starts from the standpoint that every nation has to have a credit system which will provide credit for its industrial production, its infrastructure, its advanced agriculture, and the trade and investment policies do not have to be in dollars. That's the move away from the dollar. So this is becoming inevitable, as President Putin has said recently. Now, we're also seeing more in Europe speaking out. George Galloway's No to NATO movement. Jacques Beau, who's a former Swiss intelligence officer, gave a very lengthy presentation the other day in which he emphasized that the war in Ukraine did not start in February 2022, but in 2008 with NATO's plans to bring Georgia and Ukraine into NATO as members. So the truth is beginning to get out. Well, what about Germany? Is anyone in Germany on a high political level prepared to speak out against the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines, against Germany becoming the second or third largest supplier of weapons to Ukraine, given the history of Germany before and attacks on Russia. So there's change in the air, but that's going to require the work of individuals, organizing groups, institutions, to come out on the side of this higher peace movement. And so it's essential that those of you listening to this update find in yourself the strength and the courage to confront those war hawks by building a movement, by intervening, if you can, the way Jose Vega and his colleagues, my younger colleagues, are doing to confront the war hawks, but at the same time, find people of goodwill and good character who will join us and speak out against this war policy. That's how we're going to win the fight. It's going to be a people's movement, not tailing after politicians, but forcing the politicians to recognize that the people reject their war and reject their policies of looting, not only looting against the so-called third world, but looting against the so-called advanced sector, which, by the way, is no longer so advanced. So that's my report for today. Please join me again tomorrow. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.